Okay. We
Mhm.
are live and people are already joining in, which is exciting. So, thank you everyone who's joining us now and later. My name is Jessica Ann, and I am an indie author, and I host a publication here on Substack called Wildest Dreams. And then I'm going to pass it over to Jared to introduce himself and what OBA does here.
Hi, everybody. I am Jared. I'm the founder of OVA, One Brain Arc. We are a group of editors and I like to say story theorists who help people tell their story and get it out in the world. That's ultimately what we do.
Thank you. Yeah. And then we're here today to highlight and talk to another indie author. So, give a little preface if you're new to our indie author spotlights. One of the things that I have loved so much about Substack is been connecting with other writers here on this platform. And so, the Indie Author Spotlight was a collaborative effort between myself and the story team at OBA to be able to give back and highlight indie authors who are trying to get their voice out there, who are trying to get their work out there in the world. So, I'm going to pass it over to you, Dietrich, to introduce yourself and what you do here on Substack.
Sure. My name is Dietrich Stogner. I am an indie author based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I just published the third book in a fantasy series that I've been working on for about 5 years, and I'm looking to publish the fourth one this year. Um, I've been writing for quite a long time, but this series, like I said, didn't start until around 2020. And as for social media, I really started in short form spaces like TikTok and
Mhm.
Instagram. That's where I built the bulk of my audience. But this last year, I've really started trying to lean more into Substack to try to build a little bit of a community of people who could follow me so I could provide updates when need be and kind of connect with them. And I'm still kind of figuring out Substack as a resource, as a space. It's definitely different from something I've used before, but I am starting to see just how much value it can bring authors. So
Yeah, it's definitely for anyone new to Substack, it's not always the easiest to learn as a platform, is what I tell people, but, like, once you do figure it out, it really is worth it. Um, so so yeah, so that's exciting that you're new and growing here on Substack, and we get to help you do that. So tell us a little bit about where you are kind of in your author journey and what you're currently working on or what you recently have been working on.
sure. Back in 2020, I started writing a series that ended up getting the names getting called the Eldari Archives. It was a fantasy series, which was a new thing for me. I had never really written fantasy before, but I got an idea in my head based on a D&D campaign I ran, a homebrew D&D campaign. We finished the campaign, but I still kind of had some ideas for stories. And I wrote 2 books in that series, 2 full manuscripts, and, recognized that I had a bit of an issue because where I'd begun the series, there was just a lot of information about the world that needed to be built
Mhm.
out. And what that led to was a book that was dense with info dumping.
Yeah.
And
It's definitely hard to space that out when you're writing
it
fantasy.
is. Especially when, one of the big heavy lifts of fantasy is you have to introduce everyone to the world that it's set in, to all of the different elements of that.
Mhm.
And I was kind of struggling to figure out how I wanted to get these out in the world. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who came up with the idea of writing a series of standalone books. One reason he said fantasy is a genre that really kind of is hurting for a lot of standalone books.
Yeah.
Everyone likes building series, but there aren't a lot of one shots that you get to pick up and read. And the other opportunity that he had was that he pointed out was that I had the opportunity to tell stories set within this world that kind of helped flesh out sections and pieces of the world more organically. So it wasn't me just jamming stuff down everyone's throats. And so I decided to write 3 books leading up to the main bulk of the series. And those have been the 3 that I've released the last few years. So in 2003, I released the very first book in the series called Frostbitten. It's a fantasy horror story
Mhm.
that follows a soldier that is assigned to a posting that he doesn't know why he's been sent there. It's way off in the middle of nowhere. No one there knows why he's been sent there, and he's not happy about it. They're not happy about it. And so the book really kicks off with him trying to figure out what is happening in this community of Lehar. Why was he sent here? What is it that he's supposed to find? And then things happen and people get chilly and people scream and all kinds of fun. Um, That was followed up by a fantasy heist that I published in 2004 called Extraction. Extraction is the story about a pair of thieves that are basically forced to take on a very difficult job, which is to steal some fantasy bull semen. Um, that Listen, I joke all the time. I'm not very good at elevator pitches. Extraction made the elevator pitch the easiest that I've ever seen.
There you go.
Um, and so I wrote that book, and that got very well received. And then last November, a few months ago, I published Ranger, which was my first swing at a fantasy romance that follows a young woman who volunteers for an organization in order to spare her brothers from military conscription, and follows her being assigned to guard a member of nobility, and the two of them hang out. They're in close proximity, and sparks fly. And that one came out
We
back
all
in
love a good
November,
forced proximity trope.
right? The funny thing was, I don't I haven't read a lot of romance. It was one of the big things I was worried about
Well,
going
it's
into
big.
Ranger. And so after it came out, people kept going, "Oh, I love that it's got this trope," and I'm like,
Didn't
"Yeah,
even know
it
that.
does. Definitely does." So,
Oh,
um,
that's great.
and then right now I'm working on the fourth book in the series, which is going to be called Resonant. And Resonant is when the series is basically switching directions. So we're no longer looking at standalones. We're starting the bulk of the series that's going to take place, and it will introduce a character named Elia Creighton, who will be the primary character for the rest of the series. Elia is a character. She was the first one that I wrote in this world. She's one that's very important to me, that I really, really care about, and I'm very excited for people to finally get to her part of the story and find out what she's all about.
That's awesome. Wow. That is so much. How long, like, just give me an idea of how long this has been since you have been writing in this, I guess, not series, but in this world. This,
Yeah, I started writing in 2020. Like a lot of us, I found myself kind of with a little bit of spare time,
yeah.
and so I started writing in the series. Then I wrote Resonant, and then the two follow-ups, which will be called Desolation and Mire, and over the next 2 years. So yeah, I've been working on it for a little over 5 years now, and right now, the current plan is that this is going to be a 10-book series. So I have the all of them plotted out, ready to go. And so we're going to start working our way through them.
Wow, that's so awesome. Yeah. So I'm curious because we're talking about a little bit about finding your voice in
Mhm.
writing because I think a lot of I know that was something that I struggled with, especially when I first started writing. Like, what would you say? Like, what did you first recognize as, like, your own voice? And then how did you know that this was your voice, I guess, in writing? Because, like, you have a lot of different genres too, so I'm like, no like, genres, I guess, subgenres within the fantasy world, right? So how do you maintain your voice throughout all of that?
It's interesting. It actually came from a very, very panicked moment that I had. My background is not in creative writing. I was a journalist for about 5 years. I have a journalism degree, and one thing you'll learn really quickly about journalists is their writing is lean and stripped down. You don't have a lot of flowery prose. And when I knew I wanted to start writing fantasy, one of the first things I did was start reading the big hitters in the series. I picked up George R. R. Martin, Robert Jordan, Tolkien, N.K. Jemisin. These renowned authors, and I was about halfway through Resonant, and I began to have a bit of a panic moment because I was reading these, and one of the consistent threads among all of them is that they have this very epic and flowery prose.
Yep.
A lot of it, particularly people like Tolkien, Jordan, Jemison. Good grief! Like that woman might be one of the most brilliant writers alive today, and her prose is just incredibly dense and elaborate and almost lyrical the way that it comes
Mhm.
out. And I don't know how to write like that.
Same.
Yeah. And, I have a very good friend of mine, he is, head of an English department at a local school,
Mhm.
and he's been helping me with my writing for years, and, I reached out and I was like, "I wanna talk about something, can we grab dinner?" And so we did. And I was explaining to him what was going on, and he was the first one to tell me, he was like, "You gotta understand, you're looking at this as a bug, this is a feature. He said, fantasy as a genre has had every type of writer out there. They've had so many different styles, so many different approaches. And the key is to figure out what makes you unique as a writer, as a
Okay.
creative. And he said, your background in journalism, the way you've been taught to create these lean, propulsive paragraphs that pull people from one paragraph to the other, he said, that's a very hard thing for people to learn to do. You've had years of experience working to develop that. He said, so don't freak out about it, lean into it. And then he also gave me a copy of The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, who one of the best fantasy writers out there. And Joe Abercrombie is a nails to the wall bullet point writer. His prose is lean, it is bloody, and it is clean across the board. And it immediately let me know that, okay, there was space for someone who wrote like me. And one of the interesting things is when Frostbitten came out, a consistent theme that I heard from people was they thought that this was a great book for people who didn't read a lot of fantasy, a great
Mhm.
introduction, because it gave people the opportunity to engage with a story without having to make that jump into that fantastical prose, into that lyrical prose, and to read something that felt a little bit more familiar. And I don't know if that's the case for a lot of people who've read it, but it's very much ended up being my style and my approach.
That's awesome. Um, do you think there was a point at which, I guess, did or I guess maybe did you ever feel like you were trying to sound like other writers or when like you said, like, we all learn, like, from the writers that we're, reading, and at what point did you change and, like, really define your own voice?
Uh, I work with an amazing editor, Cameron Montague Taylor. She's brilliant, and I've been working with her on all of these books. And I remember when I sent her the first draft of the draft of Frostbitten for her to go through. There's a sequence at the end where the mastermind behind everything reveals himself, and I wrote this like page and a half long section of him explaining his motivation and blah. And I thought I was cooking, like I thought it was great. And she highlighted the whole section, and her whole comment was a gif from the movie Incredibles, which is the villain saying, "You son of a gun, you got me monologuing." And then right below it, she wrote, "This is you trying to be someone you're not. Stop doing that and write it the way you want to." And the funny thing is, once I revised that, I genuinely feel like the scene ended up so much better because I wasn't trying to be someone else. I was just trying to tell the story that I wanted to tell.
Yeah, that is so important. I think that's something that if you're not familiar with the work that One Brilliant Arc, Oba, does, is helping people find that unique voice and really tell
Mm,
their story because I think that's so important as writers, as authors, to be able to because I think people will resonate with that because it comes off as it's genuine, it's real, it's unique, and, like, that's
mm,
what we want, right? We don't want, every book to sound the same that we
mm,
read. Finding your unique voice, I think, is what's gonna make, your book special, and obviously why people are following you and why they're reading your books because they wanna hear that unique, voice that comes across in your writing, so that's really awesome to hear from a more seasoned author. I just have 1 book out now. So, I just released my first book in December, but I also will say I don't have a flowery writing style at
mhm.
all, and I also write in fantasy or I guess I jump genres a little bit, but have you ever heard of, what's called upmarket fiction? Or
I
have
have
you heard of
not.
that term? So,
No.
it's not used a lot, but when I found it, I was like, "That's me." Um, because it's not upmarket fiction is almost like a combination of commercial fiction and literary fiction.
Okay.
And so so I am not a literary writer by any means. I am not flowery. I feel like I also have a very, like, concise writing style. What literary fiction does usually really well is it has really uh, driven like, character-driven stories, and that's what carries literary fiction a lot of times. So, like, having the themes and characters of literary fiction with the ease of reading style like commercial fiction, and you have, like, kind of this baby and it's upmarket fiction.
Yeah.
So, I would be curious, yeah, if your books would fall into that style of more of the style of commercial fiction, maybe with some of the deeper, themes or characters like literary fiction does.
It's hard to tell. I think one of the misconceptions, and it was one I kind of carried around even though I think I should have known better, is that
Mhm.
lean writing can't really be powerful, right? It can't really be as impactful as that. But I mean, the genre I grew up reading and deeply loving, the two genres were horror and noir. And if you look at noir, you got Elmore Leonard, and that man never used 40 words when 3 would do. Like, that man's writing was as lean as a razor blade and just cut through everything, and yet his books are iconic. They
Mhm.
hit with a force. And then the other author that I really, really inspired me growing up was Stephen King. I
Yeah,
love
same.
Stephen King. And the fascinating thing about Stephen King is his writing is not that complex.
It
It's
really
in
is.
fact, I
Yeah.
think that's the source of his popularity, and yet he can find just simple sentences that hit
Mhm.
you so hard and manage to evoke the kind of emotions that he's trying for in those scenes. And I realized at a certain point that I had the opportunity to do the same thing in the works that I was doing. And I was like, it's not easy. Like, writing prose like that is still lean and yet still hits that hard takes a lot of thought and rewrites and help from people like editors and beta readers. But the handful of times that I think I've really nailed it, I hear from readers.
Mhm.
I hear the line, the one thing, and I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
So,
that is.
I um I want to go back to what we were talking about before. We were talking about the more about voice stuff, and we're talking about that. I think we wrote an article for Oba that was discussing the idea that finding one's voice, the term finding one's voice,
Mhm.
is a myth, because your voice is yours. I was
Mhm.
listening to Ranger a little bit, and also as somebody who's watched your lives, I felt your personality, your voice in that. And my question to you would be for other, sh- I guess, newer writers, what would you say when if they come to you and ask you, how do I find my voice? How do I do that? What would your response to that be?
um, I had a journalism professor who talked a lot about that every single person has a good writer inside them. The problem is, uh, and I'll use different language than he did, just in case you tend to shy away from that kind of thing, is that every good writer is also buried under about 6 tons of garbage. He said, "There's nothing we can do about it. It's pumped into us from the time we grow up. It's
Mhm.
influence from television, movies, and books, and everything else that we think is good, but has nothing to do with who we are." And he said, "And unfortunately, the only way to get yourself out from under a pile of garbage is to dig, which means writing, which means writing a lot, which means writing a lot of stuff that you look back on and go, nope, that was definitely not it." I am in the process. I talked about I'm working on Resident now. I've already written a full draft of Resident. I wrote it 5 years ago, and I've come a long way as a writer. And so one of the things that I am seeing is how much I was throwing spaghetti at the wall, and that's kind of what you have to do. You have to write a lot, and then as you do that, you start recognizing those things that you keep coming back to. You start recognizing those things that you start to feel at home with when you write. This kind of interaction, the kind of stories, the kind of dialogue. And I see that I get a chance to work with a lot of great writers and get to know a lot of great writers, and I've gotten to see them proceed throughout their career. There's one that I absolutely love. Her name's Taylor Vaughn. She writes these incredible sci-fi superhero stories. She wrote a great fantasy story, but I've now read 5 books that she's written, and what I've gotten to see is more and more her unique voice coming out into her writing. And the thing is, I think that's what brings us back to an author over and over again. It,
Yeah.
it is when we start recognizing that voice, when we realize that they've got something unique to say, but you can't find that without digging yourself out of that pile of garbage. My journalism professor was a lot more obscene than that, so you use much different language. So,
No, that was good, yeah. Good advice for sure. Um I was just reading, yeah, the comments, just agreeing that, yeah, good advice for writers is to, yeah, just, yeah, keep writing and you eventually I would say maybe finding isn't, like, the better word would be, like, rediscovering your
Mhm.
voice because it's already there. You're just having to sift through all of the garbage.
Exactly.
Yep. And I think, the other thing is it's a lifelong process. I don't think you ever stop working towards finding, like, developing your voice. I think every time you write, you get a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer. You're never gonna hit there's no finish line.
Yeah,
But that's actually kind of the exciting thing because that means if I write 50 books in my lifetime, there's never gonna be a point where I finish a book and say, "It's not gonna get better than this." It's always gonna get better, and that's really kind of exciting.
yeah. So can you tell me maybe I don't know if this might be a bigger question, but what is writing to you, or what is this story to you? Like, because being a writer is not an easy thing, right? It has to come from the heart, because or else none of us would be doing this. um, but what about this story made you, that keeps you going? Because this is, I mean, you're in it for the long haul. It's 10 book series,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
What does it mean to you? I'm really curious.
Um, I use writing in a very real way to kind of explore some of my own conflicts, some of my own questions about the world, that kind of thing. And I think fantasy is a great way to do that. I think good fantasy is a lens that we view the world through. And when when I was writing in 2020, I started writing. Um, I started writing when I was having a lot of difficulties with the way I viewed my relationship with my country. I served in the Navy for 8 years. My father was a soldier for 25 years. I come from a very patriotic family, a very hoorah. And one of the hardest things for me to do as I've gotten older is reconcile what I thought I knew as a kid and what I've come to learn as an adult and kind of come to terms with that. And Resonant very much began as the idea of how do people in a country that has done a horrible thing, how do they reconcile their place in the world with the country that they're a part of? And that exploration has driven most of every plot that I've got. Frostbitten is the closest to a self-insert that I have because Frostbitten is about a soldier who has been grown up in the lap of privilege, receiving all of the benefits of the empire that he's part of, and then for the first time, he's put out into a part of the world where he gets to see the communities that have been exploited in order to create that privilege, and that conflict really comes to play with that. Extraction's main character has understands the place that his life went badly. He's dealing with a lot of trauma, and he thinks he has a clear view of what happened. And he is forced to kind of look at that from another person's perspective and understand that when you get older, things are a lot more complicated. And then Ranger at its core is about a young woman who wants to do anything she can to protect the people she loves. And unfortunately, I think one of the hardest lessons that all of us learn as we become adults is that you can have all the good intentions in the world, but to quote Stephen King, growing up is learning that the world has teeth and will bite you with them anytime it wants to. And coming to that realization, I think, creates an arc that no matter how fantastical the setting, no matter how strange the characters, it is something that we can all connect to. And as I write, I find that my writing doesn't have a heartbeat unless I put a little bit of my own questions about the world within it. So
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
I'm you both have, you did just you have a bunch of books out now, and Jess is just released hers. I'm working through my debut novel for the end of the year, and I'm finding one of the most challenging parts of it is reconciling how much of yourself, as you just talked about, you put into your story. Um, and when I'm assuming that a lot of your story seems to surround, military type of things like that in your history with that. How do you reconcile some of the things you learn about yourself as you write?
I mean, it's all part of the journey that we all take as people, I think, and that's writing is one of the most human things that I think we can do. It's a good writing, I will say, is one of the most human things we can do. Anybody can be a bad writer. That's super easy. But good writing is about that human journey. And I think the books and the stories that really linger with us are the ones where the author has almost opened up a vein and bled onto those pages. And there's so much of who they are woven throughout these characters, throughout these sentences, throughout every choice that they made on every step of the page. And so it is difficult for me to judge, like, am I putting too much of myself into this? Am I exposing myself a little bit too much? But I had a conversation a while back with a friend who wanted some advice on how she could get people to engage more with her content on TikTok. And I went back and looked over her content. And when I came back, I said one of the things that her content was well produced, it was polished, it was well written, it was
Mhm,
charming. None of it was about her. And I think that there, the best writing, the best content, the best art creates that bridge between you and the
mhm,
creator, creates that connection. Doesn't mean that you know them personally, doesn't mean you know everything going on in their life, but it allows you to see a little bit of a reflection of what you go through in what they're put down on the page or put on the canvas or recorded on video, whatever the case may be. And so while it is hard to sometimes put a lot of your more vulnerable elements onto the page,
mhm.
I think that when we do manage to do that, when we do manage to weave that in, those are the moments that really linger with people in a very, very powerful way. There is one of the main elements of Extraction is Aldo's strained relationship with his father. And it's strained for a very good reason. You will find that out very fast in the book. It's strained for a damn good reason. Pretty much everybody who reads it when they get to that point is like, oh, nope, screw that guy. Like, they all hate him. And I will say that a lot of the challenges I've had connecting with my father ended up on that page. And one consistent thing I get from people who read Extraction is that the moments between Aldo and his father feel alive in a way that
Mm.
it sticks with them. So it's hard, yes, putting yourself on the page, but I genuinely think if you can find a way to do it that doesn't feel forced, if you can find a way to do it that feels genuine, that people are going to come back and react to that, respond to that over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so true. I have, a character in my book, Leah. She's a single mom, which I am also a single mom. And so I actually don't relate to her on a personality level almost at all. But I think, she was actually one of my hardest characters to write, but what I realized actually is she's some of the worst parts of myself and the
Mm.
things I struggle with the most, and so it was very vulnerable putting that part of me into this character, into this book, but what I'm finding is, like, so I always love to see who people resonate with because I have 3 main characters, and by far, Leah is the one that most everyone says is the one they resonate with the most. And I'm
Hmm.
like, I really wonder, like, if it's because that realness that, like, comes out, like, in the struggle, like, because it's the parts that we all struggle with, that her character really exemplifies is the struggle of being human, and sometimes life sucks.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you just wanna go binge a show and drink some wine. No.
Listen, I I think that's always going to come through when an author has that moment of vulnerability. And man, that you find some magic there. It's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, so to any writers out there listening, is to add those vulnerable parts of yourself, of your voice, in your story. It doesn't have to be exactly you, but I think that's what, like you said, what people connect with.
Yeah.
So do you have I guess, so who is this, like, story for? Who would you say, do you write for a target audience? Or who do you want the story to reach or inspire? I'm curious.
That's evolved over the years. I think when I first started writing, it was for my wife.
Mhm.
I am incredibly lucky to have a incredible wife that I've been married to for 12 years now. We've got two great kids, and she is always one of the first people who get her hands on what I write. And I am the neediest bastard when she's writing my book. I'm like poking my head around the corner going, "Where are you at? Why didn't you laugh at that page? Oh
my
God,
gosh.
everything's terrible. Like I'm the worst." She has ejected me from the house on multiple occasions. Um, and I used to write from that angle of, if I was trying to evoke a specific emotion,
Mhm.
what do I need to put on page to evoke that emotion from
Yeah.
her? Um, I think that's evolved quite a bit, because as I've gotten a little bit more of an audience, as I've started to hear people's feedback of how they react to scenes and all that, I've started to understand that the the first thing you learn to do is write prose, write copy that really speaks to a specific person that you're thinking about. That's the next thing you have to learn to do, is write copy that speaks to a specific group that you're
Mhm.
thinking about. And the hardest thing to do is to write a moment that will hit a huge swath of the population in exactly the way you need. I think in Frostbitten, I did that okay. But Frostbite's an interesting example. Frostbite's a fantasy horror, and I wrote some scenes that I wanted to be terrifying. And I have some people who read Frostbitten and were like, "I hate you. I just made my husband go lock all our doors. I'm not sleeping again, and everything's terrible." And then I have other people who read Frostbitten and they're like, "Yeah, pretty spooky, man. Anyway, I'm gonna go out tonight." And I'm like, "All right, well." Um, with Extraction, there is a scene. One Chapter 14 of Extraction has become somewhat infamous. Um, without going into details, it is the one moment in that where the horror fan in me kind of pokes his head up and is like, "Hi, hello." And just about everyone that hit really, really well. But I still had a few people who were like, "Okay, cool," but wasn't exactly that. When I started writing Ranger, I knew from the beginning there was one moment in that book. There was one specific moment that I wanted to hit a very specific way. I wanted it to hit hard. And that's an intimidating thing when you start an entire book knowing that, in a very real way, whether or not that book lands for people is going to depend on the delivery of a specific moment in that story. But Ranger is very much that. I think Ranger has so much going on. I think it's the best writing I've ever done. And the thing I am proudest of most is that I have yet to talk to someone that wasn't absolutely laid out by 6 words in the book. And when I knew that that's what I wanted, then that was very, very much became my intent when I was crafting it. And so I think that's one of the biggest things you learn, is that at the beginning, you're crafting lines to hit your audience a specific way.
Mhm.
Then when you get better, you're crafting entire scenes to hit your audience a specific way. But when you really start getting up a little bit further, you are crafting the entire book, building and structured around those moments to create all of the circumstances necessary for those moments to hit the way you are. And I'm still nowhere near as good as as my favorite authors out there. But like I said, it's an ongoing thing. But yeah, right now I try to write for the people I know love my book, and I try to make sure that when they close the cover on one of my stories, that they feel like their time has been well spent within my world. So.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, you definitely have me intrigued, and now I want to read them. So, do you have, Jared, did you have any other questions, or we can talk about how people can find you, or if you have any, what are the next steps, any teasers for future
Sure.
books? Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to know, Due to let us know where we can find him, as well as, you know, like you said, some of the little nuggets that we can maybe look out for if we're a fan of what you've been doing.
Sure. I'm mostly active on TikTok and Instagram. My username is Dietrich Stogner on both of those. Easy to find me, and I got plenty of content going back quite a ways. I tend to review indie books. I don't spend a lot of time reviewing trad published books, not because I don't love them. I read them like
Mhm.
crazy, but I like drawing attention to some brilliant indie authors out there. I'm on YouTube. You can just find me searching by my name, and I've started putting out some more content kind of talking about the journey of writing, the things that build behind it, and what it means to actually like make that progress on stories and things like that. um, I recently began a podcast with a friend of mine that is very, very dumb. It's very nerdy, and we're having so much fun doing it. Kate Page and I co-host a podcast called "May the Force Live Long and Prosper," and literally, it's just a breakdown. One week we watch an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which Kate's never seen, and then the next week we watch an episode of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, which I've never seen, and we just break them apart and have some fun with it. It's been a blast. We've been having a great deal of fun doing that. Um, and then yeah, I'm working on Resonant now. Resonant's a big deal for me. This is the book that kicked off this series. It's one I've been thinking about pretty much constantly for 5+ years. And it's the character that means the most to me. Elliot Creighton was, in a very real way, inspired by my youngest daughter, who is this brilliant young woman. And so it's very important to me. As I go through it, as I'm doing these revisions, there are sequences and scenes from it that may not make the final cut. I'm a big fan of Kill Your Darlings, and that's a little hard for me. But some of the scenes that we're pulling out, I've been working a lot with my narrator who did Ranger. Ranger is my very first audiobook. And by the way, if you read audiobooks at all, the audiobook of Ranger is the way to read it because Cassie Corbin is like she took scenes that I wrote. I wrote them. I know what happens. I know exactly what happens. And I'm walking outside my townhouse, walking my dog, listening to Cassie read this chapter that I wrote. And one of my neighbors stops and is like, "Are you okay?" Because I have tears pouring down my
Oh
face.
my god.
Cassie, it's great. Cassie's going to reach down your throat, rip your guts out, and throw them at your feet. And you're going to say, "Thank you, please. May I have another?" It's amazing. Um, but Cassie has read Resonant. She knows what's going on. And she and I have been talking a lot about it. And so the introduction to Resonant, the very first opening chapter, she actually has right now, and she is going to be recording a audio short with it, and we are going to be releasing that. Um, and I will include all the precursors. You should read Ranger first before you listen to that, but we're hoping by the end of this month we'll have that out. And then the idea is that I want to start writing a few short scenes, short stories, things like that. I'll be releasing them through my Substack that kind of build up to what happens in Resonant. Start
Mhm.
presenting some of those questions that we have to answer. And then, yeah, Resonant will come out this year. I don't yet have a release date. I'm guessing October, like the fourth quarter. But Resonant is something I'm very excited for people to see. It introduces several new characters, but if you've read Ranger, you are going to get to reconnect with some of the characters from that book. And if you've read Frostbitten, you're going to get to reconnect with some of the characters from that book. So it's very exciting to be at the part of this journey now where those all those threads that I laid are starting to weave together, and I get to see how they pay off. And um, I'm excited to see how people react to it. It's gonna be good.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry, just go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm so excited to keep following along now.
I was just gonna say that I've been I was really excited to talk to you and have you here because I've been, as I've said to you, I was a fan of you on TikTok, and one of the things that I really liked about you is how much you care about the indie author community and how much you like how much work you put into like not only putting out your own stuff and promoting your own stuff, but also making sure that you elevate others and put people out there. So I feel like I just want to say anybody that's watching that's new to you, definitely go and support Dietrich, not just for him because that's also amazing, but also for the work that he's doing for the author community in general. So yeah, I think you're doing amazing. So thank you for what you do as well.
I appreciate. I will say if there's one thing that I think indie authors benefit from the most, it's community. And I have a lot of
Mhm.
people who ask me how they can get engaged with the community. Um, and I don't think there's magic to it. I don't think there's a secret. I think if you find ways that you can give back to that community, that you can support other authors, read their books, talk about them on video, go and post reviews about them, ask questions in their comments, give them seeds to start building off of, build those connections. I started this. I started on TikTok back in 2021 because a friend basically bullied me into doing it. I did not want to do it. And I'll tell a short little story, before we finish. I made a bunch of content and it was terrible. It just kind of didn't go anywhere. But I had one person who kept popping into my comments and saying, "Hey, I think this is a great job. I think this was great." Asking me questions, giving me something to respond, just really making me feel welcome. Her name's Kate Page. I host a podcast with her. She is also one of the most ferociously gifted authors that I think I've ever had the privilege of meeting. Her book Funny Girl, which came out a couple years ago, was unquestionably my book of the year, and I've read it 3 times since then. If you like romance, it's a no-brainer. It's brilliant. But Kate just taking the time to say, "Hey, I like what you're doing. Hey, here's a question." It made me feel like I had an anchor point when in a lot of ways, when you start with a community, you feel very lost. You feel like that kid in the corner who doesn't know anybody. And if you've been that kid in the corner and you didn't know anybody, then each of us know how much it means the first time someone walks up and says, "Have some punch. Why don't you come tell me about yourself?"
Mhm.
You can be that for so many people out there, and it makes more of a difference than anything else will in their writing career. So,
Yeah. I mean, that same exact advice goes for people here on Substack. Like that so you may not know this, Dietrich, but I stumbled onto Substack because of Jared actually a year ago. I had no idea. I thought I was signing up for his newsletter, which I was, but I also signed up for Substack in the process. And then I'm like, "What is this?" I had no idea, never heard of it. And slowly started learning the platform, and my approach has been exactly what you're saying. Is just it's all about community. It's all about supporting other authors and actually having these like some of these Substack lives have been my favorite when I started doing them. I was terrified the first Substack live I did
mhm.
um almost a year ago, but it really is about creating these connections, and now I can say I literally have friends and a community that is worldwide thanks to the Substack, and like, for anyone listening, like, I had 0 subscribers and had no idea what I was doing a year ago on this platform, and I have, what, almost 4,500 now on Substack, and, like, that's because I just talk to people. You just talk now, if I can figure out TikTok and Instagram, maybe I can learn from you because I really don't like making videos, but, um
um, I will tell you, we did a launch party for Ranger back in late October when it came out, and there were a few things that meant as much to me as the fact that I had people come in from all over the country to celebrate this with me. Yeah, community is everything. If you build it, it's going to give you benefits far past what you can possibly imagine. Yeah, and I really enjoy getting to meet new people and getting to connect with them. So,
That's awesome. Well, I'm so happy we got to do this interview. Jared, thank you for making the connection. I'm definitely gonna be following, and now I have till October to read 3 of your books to get caught up. So, and thank you
uh,
everyone who joined in live. We appreciate all of you. We'll also make sure to drop any links to our outside account so you guys can follow along as well. So, thank you.
Thank you.
thanks,
All right,
everyone.
have a good day. Bye.